Larry Johnson in the early 90s was not just another star. He, along with a small company of other young stars, was creating a new image of the NBA. But the best Nevada player in the history and the leader of the Charlotte Hornets in the 90s by the beginning of the 21st century hadn't met expectations. Then he quietly retired due to chronic back pain, but we remember him not for this. Experienced fans remember his resonant statements, trash talk, and even fights, his roles in the commercials and even movies. In the True Space Jam, for example, we remember his dunks, record contracts, and two main nicknames: a standard NBA abbreviation, but so close to my fellow homies LJ, and the favorite of the players of those names, Grandmama. Hello, you are on the channel Chronicle of Hoops, and today we will remember such a short but such an eventful path of the first number of the 1991 draft. Larry Demetric Jones was born March 14, 1969 in Tyler, Texas. He is one of the classic examples of American athletes who grew up in a black neighborhood and learned the laws of the streets ruled by drugs and guns. He fell in love with basketball from an early age. Johnson played basketball constantly, early in the morning, even before school, played in the evening and played at night, ignoring the police sirens and suspicious guys hanging out around the court. During the day he didn't go out to play because the shops in the hood were closed for lunch everywhere, and literally every day there were attempts to rob them, and the parents of most children preferred not to risk it. We all had to fight. Everyone understood this and took it for granted. Well, at least once a week. If you played from Monday to Saturday without a fight, you already knew that it would happen on Sunday. You can get used to it. As for me, it was better to do everything early and not fill your head with unnecessary things for the rest of my days. Everyone who subsequently heard the story from him understood where his many brawls on the court came from. His single mother didn't have the opportunity to move, and she took her son to the police boxer training department. Thanks to such serious training, he developed his body, and this helped the teenager to surpass his rivals on the court even more. Of course, the coaches immediately began to persuade the guy to choose American football, but Larry didn't even discuss the exclusivity of basketball. He wanted to change school to Lincoln High, which was popular among African Americans, but Johnson's mother decided otherwise. She took him to elite Skyline School with Irishmen in uniforms but no proper basketball team. In addition, it was necessary to go there by bus with 2 transfers. But these trips became his motivation because he saw with his own eyes how people live in other areas. Johnson realized that becoming a professional player was his only chance to get out, and this thought brought him to dominance at the school level. He had come to the coach of the school team and declared that he would become his best player, and then he would conquer the whole state. And in fact it happened! The Raiders turned into contenders for the Texas Championship, with Larry had incredible average of 25 points, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists. And sometimes he won matches literally alone. At the same time, he progressed every year and in 1987 became the best player among the high schools of the whole country. And despite the fact that he received the Mr. Basketball USA 97 award only in 2002, even then it became obvious that the guy would become a star. Also, in 1987, Larry Johnson, as a member of the US team, won silver medals in the Junior World Championship and planned to enter Southern Methodist University. But on the first try, he failed to score 700 points in the test that allowed him to get into the team. At the second time, he scored a lot more than necessary, which raised suspicion among the university administration. In addition, they feared that could be sanctioned for corruption in matters of admission of necessary players. A third test was scheduled, but Larry refused on principle to take it and entered the Odessa Preparatory College, which was also in his native Texas. It came as a huge surprise to them because they didn't even send Johnson a grant offer, because they couldn't imagine that the best student in the country would take their college seriously. As a member of the OJC, he became the first player in the history to win the NJCAA Player of the Year award twice. In the 1989, as a member of the US team, he became the champion of the Duisburg Summer Universiade. After graduating from Odessa, Larry Johnson had plenty of offers, and he couldn't resist the opportunity to play under Jerry Tarkanian, one of the most promising teams in the CAA of recent years. LJ slammed in the college league, and in just 2 years became unquestionably one of the most successful players in the new age of NCAA. At the Rebels, he joined Greg Anthony and teammate Stacey Augmon. The renewed team anonymously received the first place in the preseason ratings, and during the season even exceeded the expectations. Coach Stark quickly built a game around Johnson, and Nevada destroyed their opponents one by one. They lost only 5 games this season and ended up with an incredible average of plus 18 points difference. The team easily overcame the knockout games, and in the title match, the Rebels beat the Duke of the legendary Mike Krzyzewski with a score of 103-73. All leaders remained in the team for their last year, so they were considered the undisputed favorites of the 91 season. That season, Johnson did even better, winning the Player of the Year award in almost all versions. But this time, in the Final Four, the Blue Devils were stronger. Krzyzewski learned from the last year defeat some lessons and put the leaders of the Rebels on fouls. Larry had been sitting with a fold-out 7 minutes before the end, and Augmon got the second technical foul a minute after Johnson was sent off. In the end, they didn't stand a chance. Johnson all this time exemplary used his advantage in athleticism over the rest of the guys, and doctors were surprised in the almost minimal percentage of fat in the human body. He stopped growing in high school and was taller than 2 meters only in running shoes. But that didn't stop LJ from dominating the NCAA center position precisely because of that superiority. This is his whole body. It looked perfect, like a Greek god, and openly or secretly everyone wanted the same, praised teammate Greg Anthony. Of course, after these 2 seasons, all experts predict him to be the first draft pick. The 1991 draft itself, although it ended up falling short of expectations, was considered quite deep. Scouts were talking about 4 or 5 franchises and a few more All-Stars. And Charlotte, who were one of 4 teams that entered the league 3 years ago, had a tough task ahead of them. Fans were literally demanding for Georgetown's Dikembe Mutombo. Head coach Gene Littles wanted forward Billy Owens. Johnson was personally chosen by club vice president Alan Bristow. His choice can hardly be called a surprise, but many people doubted its expectancy. Skepticism was presented even at press conferences. The situation was complicated by Billy Owens himself, who didn't sign a contract with Sacramento Kings, who had chosen him. And the coach Littles immediately stated that if his management refused to trade Billy to the Hornets, he would resign. So exactly that happened. Alan Bristow took over the management of the team and after successful preseason matches was finally approved for a new position. It was in those years that the rookies were filled with spirit and began to demand more zeros in contracts. All that time, fixed rookie contracts were not registered in the CBA, so each of them negotiated with the club himself or by an agent. Johnson was no exception. For a long time he couldn't agree with the Hornets of the amount of the first contract, missed all 26 days of training camp, but when the club made the last offer, Larry saw all his way too. With no NBA or in Europe, he agreed to $20 million in 6 years. In the end, he only arrived on the team on the day of the first game of the season against the Celtics in Boston. Of course, the veterans of the team couldn't leave just like that. Dale Curry, Steph's father, told Johnson that there was a tradition in Charlotte that a rookie brought the team on the first game of the season. Larry was delighted and ran onto the Boston Garden hardwood, alone. The whole team at that time was dying with laughter under the tribune. Johnson swallowed it and made it his motivation. And his game and leadership skills helped him become a worthy captain for the next season. The second strength test was meeting with Michael Jordan. Larry later told how Mike psychologically affected him during the match. He did some bullshit. The first time I met him, it was on the court, and he walked straight up to me and go, "How's Dorothy?" "That's my mom." "Oh shit, sure, alright." I couldn't play the whole game. "You got me, you got me." He walked up to me and asked me how my mom was. "How does that?" I think I scored 8 points and I was averaging 24. In fact, back then he scored 14 points and made 5 of 3 field goals. But the evening definitely turned out to be unlucky for him. The new coach almost from the beginning of the season decided to bet on the bunch of Bogues Johnson. The two undersizes quickly found the common language on the court, became friends, and easily dealt with even stronger opponents. They made the fans of the team fall in love with them and aroused sympathy even among neutral spectators. Larry wasn't a typical power forward. He could run himself or beat the first numbers on the dribbling position and at the same time crush Kevin Willis or Dennis Rodman in the 3-second zone just a moment later. Johnson was a dunking machine, obvious to any interference, but also not without plasticity in finishing. Even with his height, he was fighting for rebounds not only due to power, but also thanks to incredible arms motility. And all this was in addition for a fixed throw, phenomenal footwork, and insane dedication. He couldn't fail to become the Rookie of the Year, even though his main competitor, Mutombo, made it to All-Star game in his first season. When Charles Barkley was asked about Rookie of the Year, he briefly replied, "Larry is the present and future of our position." A bit pompous, yes, but let's face it. During the first season, Converse offered a contract to Johnson and in fact took him under their wing. They immediately launched a series of commercials, in which LJ appeared in the form of Grandmother, who was dunking in Converse sneakers even better than Johnson himself. And there were so many of these commercials that at first it caused a crazy hype, increased the recognition of the Hornets start even among viewers who were not interested in basketball. And it sticked a Grandmama nickname for him, so Larry dressed up as an old man in ads before it was a mainstream. The second season promised to be more successful. The Hornets had a high draft pick again and were lucky to take Alonzo Mourning with the second pick, right before Shaquille. The Mourning-Johnson frontline looked promising and Charlotte was seriously talked about as one of the most talented teams in recent years. Johnson became a real star. He was called to the All-Star game for the first time and right to the start five. The Hornets made it to the playoffs and won the first series in history by defeating a bloodless Boston. The team lost its leader Reggie Lewis. But the series didn't become simpler because of this. In the deciding game, a 3-2 in the series and 102-103 in the match, only a 6-meter shot from the Mourning in the last second took the young team to the second round against the Knicks. Against the defensive machine of Pat Riley, who had 22 losses in the season, the unexperienced Hornets had little chance. In the fifth match, which was quite equal, Charles Oakley personally took the series from Johnson by scoring over him with a foul. Major league events took place during the biennium with the retirements of the Magic, Bird and Jordan. The NBA needed new heroes, and Johnson was one of its top young hopes. Fans loved him, autograph hunters were always waiting on the streets, and journalists were gossiping about a new contract, rumors about which began already in February. But the total amount of the extension came as a surprise to everyone: $84 million for 12 years. Of course, the public didn't like it. They loved to count other people's money even then, and the situation was aggravated by the fact that one of the same day Michael announced his retirement from basketball. In this background, Larry looked like a sophomore who exploited his advertising popularity in order to enrich himself and doesn't think about the perspectives of the club. Accusations of wretched defense, which had previously been turned a blind eye, rained down. Even Don Nelson was indignant. Yes, for what kind of merit? He hasn't achieved anything yet. I'm not worried about the Hornets, but for the leagues as a whole, we just don't have enough money to pay new Larry Johnsons. Or if the guy plays a half Johnson strength, clubs are obliged to offer him $42 million? Even the person who offered this contract succumbed to public opinion. The club's president just a few months later would call the whole deal a sleight of hand in the negation of the player's agent. Allegedly, if there were no age limit in the collective agreement, he would have agreed to a contract of $100 million. And then the truth came out. The agreement was signed already knowing about Johnson's health problems. In one of the club's exhibition game in July, 3 months before signing, Larry awkwardly jumped, pushing off for some reason, not with his left, but with his right foot. His ankle sharply ached, given to the lower back and spine. The forward remained with the team, but just a week later, one evening, Johnson collapsed to the floor of the room and didn't feel the injured part. Intervertebral hernia in the lower back was found and required surgical intervention, which was not reported in Charlotte Hornets press center for a long time. As a result of surgery, the player's right leg lost a third of muscle mass. It was absolutely certain that there couldn't be a full recovery. Rehabilitation was supposed to take 4 or 5 months, but the team's doctor put the star on his feet by the start of the regular season. And the haste ruined another career. For 2 months, Grandmama tried to play through the pain, for which he eventually paid the price. After a triple-double in Detroit, leaving the court, Larry fell on the team doctor and whispered, "Doc, I injured my back again." The relapse led to more consequences than the original trauma. A torn ligament, a second hernia, several failed surgeries. The young Hornets, who were already considered one of the favorites of the seasons, didn't even make the playoffs, having an equal number of wins and losses. In matches without injuries, Zoe and Larry had 13-29 run. The injuries were not put forward to justify them, but nevertheless. This hard time changed the player not only physically but also mentally. When he returned, Johnson was no longer that explosive guy, dunking with or without reason. He tried to shift the small forward position, worked on the long-range shot but avoided the ball. The need to change the style of the game already had been pissing him off, and the Converse quietly terminated his contract. He began to get angry with others, and his teammates also got it. Playing without the ball had become average, and trash talk had become commonplace. Due to Larry's behavior, the US team, named the second Dream Team, gained notoriety around the world. At the World Championship in Canada, Johnson was led by his own body. He played only 15 minutes and had miserable statistics, but he managed either to talk dirty to the Australian or to push the Puerto Rican. As they say, they won the gold, but the sediment remained. Larry gritted his teeth, continued to train, and the start of the season turned out to be quite successful. The Hornets confidently started the regular season and looked much more mature. An assistant coach from Chicago came to the Hornets camp and significantly improved the defense. Charlotte were no longer at the bottom of defensive rankings and were even considered a defensive team. Hersey Hawkins and Robert Parrish added some experience. Robert was at such an age that by the end of the year he even became a grandfather, which naturally caused a bunch of jokes related to the LJ's nickname. Johnson himself was beginning to resemble himself with unbreakable screens, medium shots from the backboard, and he still outperformed most players in athleticism. Thanks to a series of successful matches, he was invited to the All-Star game for the second time, which gave a reason to talk of revival. An elite center with the best assist-to-loss ratio, one of the league's strongest long-range guns and rebounding, Larry Johnson, kept the Hornets high in the postseason, but once again they screwed up. The Hornets overcame 15 victories in the season, and according to expert forecast, they had to fight the Chicago Bulls, in whose squad Michael had just returned. He managed to play in only 17 games of the regular season, so the first playoff series after his return beat all television records. The Bulls, inspired by Jordan's presence on the court, took the first 3 games and wanted to close the series with a sweep, but failed in the second half of the 4th game. Nevertheless, the Bulls took the lead in a minute before the end, 85-84. In the very ending, the Hornets decided to play a long attack and entrust the last shot to Larry. But after the final throw, the ball didn't even touch the ring. LJ was lying on the floor with his head down and was sweeping his parents away. The air ball in the clutch buried the last vestiges of faith in the real rebirth of Larry. After this, problems began within the team, and even though Larry was the captain who had derailed the team after setback, problems were around him. He had some tough times with some players, but all of a sudden troubles came out of nowhere. Morning's contract was expiring, and there were rumors that he showed up in Bristol's office saying, "You are paying him damn money, and now you're going to pay me less?" The thing is that the Hornets were not ready to pay Zoe the same amount, despite the fact they could, because the contract of Johnson hadn't yet entered in the force, because the 6-year rookie term had not expired. And if Morning were resigned for a similar amount than in 2 seasons, Charlotte would be paying the biggest luxury tax that the league has ever seen all the time. Meanwhile, the Miami Heat offered the restricted free Alonzo an even bigger contract, and the Hornets had no choice but to sign and trade, in which they got Glenn Rice and Matt Geiger. The irony is that without a star center, Larry Johnson's contract also lost its meaning, and fortunately, in his 5th season, he noticeably improved his statistics. Some people would say that Morning only interfered with him, but it's believed that it was a part of the club management plan to raise the price of the player. And it worked. Larry understood all this, calmly played for his own pleasure, went on TV shows and in parallel, and even played in the movie Space Jam. And by the end of the season, the Blazers, Clippers and Knicks showed interest in him. The Hornets didn't miss the chance for a complete rebuilding. The club's management chose the New York option. In a trade that came 2 days after Hornets rookie Kobe Bryant was traded for Vlade Divac, Charlotte traded Johnson for one Brett Lohaus and Anthony Mason, one of Riley's favorites who had already had finals experience. In New York, rebuilding also began after the departure of Pat Riley. The team was headed by his former assistant, Jeff Van Gundy. Only 5 players remained from the last year's roster. Promising Allen Houston was taken in the draft, and now they have acquired Grandmama with a huge contract. The Big Apple was looking to get Patrick Ewing sidekick in the fight for the championship, and the guy came to them who wanted to start everything from the very beginning. Knicks fans were perplexed by his passivity, and former partners in the Hornets simply didn't recognize Johnson. Maxi Bogues, after the game with the Knicks, even stated that the fake LJ was playing against them. He became more calm, stopped paying attention to things, after which he would have gotten furious a few months ago. This affected the initiative. In the first 50 games of the season, he scored less than 2 points in last quarters, while in Charlotte, this score was about 6. But the fans were only angered by his word that he didn't want to interfere with the team leaders, Ewing and Oakley. I wanted to stop constantly thinking about the attack, to act more freely or something. If I saw that I could have brought even greater benefit to the team with others skilled, then why am I not allowed to do this? In fact, he just wanted to get taste of winning, and the Knicks could give that to him. Or, as fans thought, after such expensive purchases, the Knicks were obliged. It was at that moment that Van Gundy made a decision that he would later call one of the wisest of his career. He included Johnson in the famous trio of captains, along with Patrick and Charles. This helped him cope with the difficulties of moving to a new position, and by the end of the regular season, Larry Johnson had found his game. In the first round of the playoffs, it was Larry who personally dealt with the former team with a long-range shot and immediately became what the fans had wanted him to be. Next, they were expected to meet with the Miami Heat, in which Mourning was exchanged and they were led by Pat Riley. This rivalry went down in history as the revenge series, but its result was influenced by disqualification from the league. After 4 games, the Heat, who had won 60 games in the regular season, were surprisingly 1-3. At the end of the 5th game, before Tim Hardaway's free throws, there was a brawl, during which PJ Brown threw Knicks point guard Charlie Ward almost into the stands. Of course, a fight got started because the entire Knicks bench immediately blew up to protect their partner. As a result, 3 Knicks players were suspended for the next match, and the Stars-Johnson pair, as well as Brown, only a player punished from the Heat, were suspended for the 7th game, or the first game of the conference finals against the Bulls, if the series ends in 6 games. With Ewing, Houston, Ward, Stars and Johnson absent, the Knicks were left with the 6 healthy players in the rotation, 4 of whom played over 44 minutes in the next game. At the same time, they managed to struggle and even took the lead in the end, but Marley's 3-pointers didn't leave them a chance. And in 7th game, the Knicks completely missed more than 100, which never happened before in the series. During that game, a clear "We want Johnson" was heard several times in the stands. It was then that it became clear that New York depended on the player. Later, he managed to rebuild very quickly to achieve the result. LJ in New York became a defensive player. In the early 90s, that would have been considered a bad joke, but in the Big Apple, it became a reality. He raised the efficiency of his actions at the 3-point line and improved the percentage of steals. He even developed his own style of personal guarding. Commentators increasingly use the expression "grab like Larry Johnson." The 1997-1998 season in New York was considered lost after Ewing's injury. However, Allen Houston and LJ had their own opinion on this matter. They stated in every interview that they were personally responsible for this season and confirmed their own words with actions. When Larry twisted his ankle and was out for a week and a half, he didn't sit on the bench in a suit. In each match, the forward changed into a training uniform to be with partners on the bench during the game. Before the playoffs, the Knicks managed to avoid the championship Chicago, but Madison Square Garden was preparing for the 2nd time in a row to meet Pat Riley's Heat. And this series was again not without disqualifications. In the 4th match, Johnson, who scored 21 points per game in the series in his native position of the 4th number, while trying in any way to stop his former partner Alonzo Mourning, hit him in the face with an elbow. A fight immediately began, which even coach Van Gundy was helping to break up, and both players were eventually disqualified for the 5th match. The Knicks won it, and in the 2nd round met with the Pacers and Reggie Miller. This is another principal rival for the Knicks, but once again Miller didn't spare them, 1-4 even the return of Patrick Ewing. In the off-season, changes were waiting. The Knicks traded young Marcus Camby and Warrior star Latrell Sprewell, but lost Oakley, Cummings and Starks. During the season as a free agent, Kurt Thomas successfully joined the team, but all the acquisitions didn't save New York from instability. And this difficult 99 season shortened due to the lockout, according to Sprewell, it was Larry Johnson who railed the team and didn't let it fall apart. the Knicks booked a last-minute ticket to the postseason. What they were waiting for, you are not going to believe, the Miami Heat, who led the Eastern Conference in additional indicators. And it was a matter of honor for them to get even not only for the last year's series, but also for 2 defeats at the end of the season. However, in the first game away, the Knicks surprisingly easily won. They had chances to catch on for the second victory, but the backline of the Knickerbockers let down with the scoring at the most crucial moment. In the third game, Johnson took over the long-range shots, and the Heat again could not cope with the opponent's defense. Plus 20 again, and Madison Square Garden smelled of sensation. Johnson threw even more, but only hit 3 out of 10, and Ewing didn't work against Alonzo, so it came to the 5th game. Let me remind you that back in the days, in the first round, they still played up to the 3 victories. In the decisive match, Johnson didn't play to the end due to injury, and the role of protagonist was played by Allen Houston, who scored the most important shot in the end, which brought the Knicks a victory in the series. In the next round, inspired, they took down Atlanta of Mutombo and Steve Smith and went through to the conference finals. Here, Indiana was again waiting for New York, and Ewing fell apart again and let the team down. It was here that Campy's finest hour came, the role of mentor for which, during the season, Tom Thibodeau, then Van Gundy's assistant, assigned Larry Johnson. After that, Jeff Van Gundy admitted, "If Johnson had a fan club, I would certainly become its president. I see no need to explain anything to him, since he himself understands everything and can convey it to others in their language. Additional responsibilities? He was happy with them." Marcus, as a result, gave out one of his best playoff series, and as he could level the absence of evening for the team. The series also featured LJ's most famous shot of his career, a three-pointer with the foul at the end of the third match. At that moment, when the arena exploded and was ready to carry him in his arms, Larry kept his cool and, after reassuring everyone, scored a free kick. Second victory in 3 matches. Bears players regained the advantage of home arena in the next game, but the Knicks were unstoppable. They reached the final. In that play, only the Twin Towers, Robinson and Duncan, were able to cope with the 8th team from the East. The final season of the second millennium was a busy one for Johnson off the court. First, there was a conflict with Bill Walton about racism, then he announced his conversion to Islam, and along the way he admitted 5 children from different women. As for Knicks, they had a good season, and Larry finally returned to the position of power forward. In fact, this time they again failed to pass Indiana, and this only confirmed that the last season was an exception and an incredible coincidence. Before his 10th season in NBA, Grandmama's back pain worsened, so Larry underwent minor surgery at the end of the off-season. After it, he couldn't even dunk without unpleasant consequences. Imagine what that means for a kid who won a high school slam dunk contest by jumping over a 7th grader. And in the competition his debut season in NBA, he lost only a blindfolded dunk by Cedric Ceballos. He was ready to end his career at any moment, but he was also pressed with the endless contract. He will still try to return to the Knicks in 2007, but already in a management position. And, without meeting mutual interest, he will go to his native University of Nevada to finish his studies and get bachelor's degree.